everyone. Welcome to the July 13th edition of the TimeformUS forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and it's a really exciting time in racing with the Saratoga meet kicking off actually later today as we're recording this pretty early this week on Thursday morning. On this podcast, though, we're going to look 2 days into that Saratoga meet. On Saturday, they're running an 11 race card, the first Saturday of this 40-day Saratoga meet. 3 graded stakes races carded. We're not going to discuss the grade 1 event, the Diana. That came up a pretty short field, just 5 runners, 4 of which are trained by Chad Brown. So that's thankfully not part of this late pick 5 sequence. There are some more interesting races to handicap as part of the late pick 5, which is races 7 through 11 on Saturday. Craig, we still have a couple of stakes in this sequence, and they're good races. The Kelso, the Sanford potentially featuring a pretty talented 2-year-old, but the surrounding stakes, the surrounding races, the non-stakes events in this Pig 5 sequence are difficult races to handicap, to say the least.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Sometimes races like sequences like this, I almost wish the Diana was a part of it. But we have one that may be as easy. I guess we'll talk about that more in a little while. But if you're going to Saratoga and are expecting an easy pick 5 sequence, you're probably coming to the wrong place, because I imagine most of the ones throughout the meet are going to be quite difficult, but very interesting to handicap.
Yes, that is always true at Saratoga, especially for these Saturday cards. Interesting, difficult sequences, but you typically get paid if you can be right a few times. We should mention there is some weather predicted, although it's not looking as bad as it originally was. I know there's some rain predicted Thursday into Friday at Saratoga. Saturday is looking pretty clear right now as I'm looking at the forecast, so hopefully all these races can stay on the turf. It's looking much better now than it was a bit earlier in this week. And Craig, we do kick off this late pick 5 sequence with a turf race. Race 7, it is an optional claiming 62,500. Non-winners of 2 other than is the allowance condition, going 5.5 furlongs on the Mellon turf course. And we've got 7 runners entered for the turf here, so not one of those gigantic fields that we're going to encounter a little bit later in the sequence, but it's still a race where contention runs pretty deep. The horse that I pegged as the morning line favorite, and since we're recording this early, maybe you don't have the morning lines yet, so I'll just kind of read them out as I go through my analysis. I pegged the number 4 Breeze Easy as the slight 9-5 morning line favorite over the number 1 Playlist at 2-1. They feel like the 2 that will probably vie for favoritism in this race. Breeze Easy, Craig, is a horse that will benefit from any pace that develops in this race, and it does feel like there's one horse in particular that could ensure a fast pace for her. She's one that I think a lot of people might want to bet back off her trip last time, when it was just one of those head-scratching Joao Rosario rides where it felt like the race set up perfectly for his horse and he somehow was able to find some trouble.
Yeah, he's not been riding in best form. We've talked about it a lot, so I don't want to harp on it too much. But he's also won again. So if you want to back this horse at a short price, beware, because sometimes Joel can still give you a good ride and sometimes he doesn't. So it's something I want to avoid. And you mentioned the pace. I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of pace in here. When I was handicapping this sequence on TimeformUS PPs, Lady Milagro, the 5 horse who we have shown on a clear lead in the pace projector, is one that I thought would maybe take more money than what your morning line has, but I also was doing some work in Formulator and saw the buyer speed figures, so I can see why she's not. And she's a horse I'm definitely going to use in here, because these 5.5 furlong sprints, we only really see them for older horses at Saratoga on the NYRA circuit, but they definitely play different than what we see at the longer distances at both Aqueduct and Belmont, and I think she's a real danger in here.
Yeah, Lady Milagro is a horse that I definitely want to discuss, and I was kind of referencing her a little bit earlier when I said that she could ensure a fast pace in this race, and I say that because even though she's shown all alone on the front end, she kind of is a horse that has one speed, and that's fast. I mean, she busts out of the starting gate, and she's not one of these horses that wants to back down the pace. She's going to open up on the field. That's the way she's been most successful, especially in her turf races, where she tends to try to run these fields off their feet. And that's definitely the way that the apprentice Jaime Torres has ridden her the two times that he's been on her in both of those turf races. So I'd imagine she's going to blast off. You would imagine that the slight turn back to 5.5 furlongs will work a little better for her than the 6 furlongs did at Belmont, but that can sometimes be a tricky thing. I mean, 5.5 furlong races, they can really bring out turf sprint specialists, and she hasn't really done it yet, so we'll see if that works for her. But her presence does make the task of a horse like the number six Glitter Up, who also wants to be forward, that much more difficult, because it just seems like she doesn't have a prayer to get to the front end with Lady Milagro in the race. Craig, what do you make of the number 1 Playlist, who feels like a horse that sort of wants to be in a stalking position? That's the kind of trip that she got last time at Ellis Park when she was so successful. And she's definitely a horse that disappointed at the start of her career. I remember last summer at Saratoga, there was a lot of buzz about her before she made her career debut. Got bet down to 4-5 that day and did not deliver, finishing off the board. And it just took a while for Wesley Ward to figure her out. She disappointed at short prices a number of times, but it felt like he found out what the key was to her last time. We don't know what it is, but I mean, she definitely delivered that performance on the racetrack finally, and the bettors were not privy to it because she went off at nearly 20-1, but won like a 1-20 shot.
Yeah, she was very good doing that. She ran a 102 TimeformUS speed figure. Something that's going to be a little bit weird getting used to is seeing all these Ellis Park running lines, but it's going to be tough. We can't underrate those because it's still the Churchill meet. You can see just from the purse of that race that the competition was strong. So I think she's definitely a strong contender. I actually prefer her to Breeze Easy. She's going to have to work out a trip from that inside post, but based on her last race, she has pretty good tactical speed, and she's certainly one that I would have on my pick 5 tickets.
Yeah, I do think she's stepping up into a tougher spot here than some of the competition she faced last time, but I mean, you could not be much more impressive winning a turf sprint than she was in that race. And she's a horse who, if you watch her 2 prior races, she had a real tendency to lug in through the stretch, and that kind of was her undoing. And she did not show that tendency last time. She ran straight as an arrow, and that definitely helped her achieve that result. So I think she's certainly dangerous if she has indeed figured things out. There is one more horse that I want to discuss, Craig, and make a case for, and that's the number 3 Bowl of Cherries. And she's a horse who's coming off some dirt races, another one who's faced weaker company in her recent starts, but I've got to say, when I watch her last 2 races and those victories, I mean, she was pretty impressive in those races. She displayed a nice turn of foot to win 2 back at Penn National, but especially her last race at Monmouth. I mean, the speed with which she put that field away when she was asked to go at the top of the stretch was pretty breathtaking. And I know it's a big step up in class here, and switching back to turf, it's another hurdle for her, but she is a horse who has turf races earlier in her career in Southern California that are right in line with her dirt races. I know she has one more recent turf race showing from 2022, or I should say early 2023 rather, back in March at Santa Anita. Don't put too much stock in that result. She got a bad trip that day, got pushed out really wide on the far turn. I think she's just gotten things together for David Jacobson, and she's another one who could sit the right trip in a stalking position.
If I had to make a top pick in this race, it would be torn between Lady Milagro and Bowl of Cherries. They will both be A's on my tickets. You covered most of it. She's handled turf in the past. When you look at her speed figures, there's not a lot of variation. And looking at the increase in her dirt figures, I don't see any reason why that wouldn't carry over to turf. And all the things you said, the only real negative I have with her is that she's ridden by jockey Irad Ortiz. He's certainly not a negative. The only negative is that he's probably going to get bet even more so at Saratoga than he did at Belmont. Fans just love him up there. He always takes too much money. But if you're playing a pick 5 and you got to get through the sequence, I think you want her on your ticket. She is 6-1 on your morning line. I'm not acting like she's going to be bet down to 9-5. I'm just not sure. He always just seems to surprise me with how much money he takes.
Yeah, I have that same concern as you do. It felt like a horse to me that couldn't take that much money, as you were kind of saying. I mean, I'd be surprised if she's any lower than third choice in this race, if she's even that. But it's always something that you want to be wary of when you're liking an Irad Ortiz horse. Let's move on to race 8. And boy, this sequence gets a lot tougher in the second leg, Craig. I mean, I might have been happy to have the Diana in the sequence rather than this race because it's just a tough one to wrap your head around. It's a New York bred maiden special weight for the fillies and mares going 7 furlongs. And I have no idea who the favorite is going to be. I guess you can see that in me pegging the morning line favorite as high as 4-1. There's nobody in here that I could really write off because none of the shorter prices honestly look that formidable. It's just a real crapshoot, and I'm not even sure where to begin.
Guess I'll just begin with the horse that I will probably make my top pick in here, and I agree with everything you said. It's a wide open race. I think if you're going to try to limit your plays, you better have a good reason because I see a lot of horses who could win. I went for a price in here, and I'm starting with Shotgun Patsy, the Belmont trained filly who actually took some money first time out. Didn't do a whole lot of running that day. She does get a rider upgrade, I would say, to Junior Alvarado. What sold me on her as a horse I really wanted to have on my ticket is I started digging into Belmont stats with maidens, and I narrowed it down to second time. Then I narrowed it down to dirt sprints, and it was pretty impressive. His win percentage, and it was a pretty big sample size, well into the 80s, I believe, over the last 5 years. He wins 28% of the time with a 2.28 ROI. So for me, with a horse that's going to be 10-1 on the morning line in a race where there's not a lot of price horses or a lot of favorites that really jumped out at me as true favorites who the race really had to go through. That was enough. I really like the fact that she took some money with a lesser known rider first time out. So I assume she's shown some talent. She's worked out well since that race, and just one that I think is going to offer some real value.
Yeah, I mean, I watched that race. I wish I saw her do a little more running, but you make some compelling points with those stats and the rider upgrade on Shotgun Patsy. So she's definitely one that you can consider in here. I mean, just to mention some of those short prices, Craig, or I mean, I guess it's all relative. I mean, short in this race could be 5-1. But I mean, Ichiban, I mean, she finally showed up last time for Linda Rice. She had excuses in her prior races. I actually liked her in that recent race at Belmont and thought she was a nice price at 4-1 that day. Just ran into a horse who really outran her odds to get the victory. But it was a good step forward for Ichiban. She's coming out of an 87 TimeformUS speed figure, which I think is one of the highest numbers in this race. It's Linda Rice, it's Jose Ortiz. I think the cat's out of the bag. Everybody knows that these horses are super dangerous, so she feels like one that could take money in here, and she honestly doesn't look that formidable. And you could say a lot of the same things about Foxy Cara, who did have a trip two back, but has still kind of had her chances. And then on the outside, Mim showed up in the slop last time for Mark Cassie. She's got some upside second off the layoff, but it's not like any of these horses are running so well in their last starts that you don't want to take somebody else at a bigger price who has upside.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard. I don't have any major knocks on them. Like sometimes in races like this, you see the horses who are going to go off the favorite, and they just say I use that term kind of loosely in a race where the favorite could very well be 4-1. Um, so I don't want to knock them too much. So it's a race I'm going to spread around. I'll mention another price horse that I actually like in here, and that's Bonadu. I guess it's the 5 horse. We don't have PPs yet with the numbers, but yeah, Bonadu is the 5 horse. I thought she had a deceptively tough trip last time from the inside post. She got in that chase position that I really don't like at all, where she was chasing a runoff leader. I thought she hung on pretty well in that one. She really improved her speed figure from what we had seen from her in the past. So she's one that I think wind up getting pretty brave. I think she'll be up close to the pace, and with another move forward, I mean, she already ran speed figures similar to the favorites in here, so she's another one I would use at a price.
Yeah, I do think we have to discuss some of the first time starters in this race because given the fact that the form of the major contenders that have experience isn't that compelling, I mean, I think we do have to, mention that there are a couple first time starters for capable connections that should be considered. The number 9, Nay Jude, feels like the one that, could be the most live with Irad Ortiz aboard. Kelly Breen does fine with first time starters. I looked up specifically 3-year-old firsters in dirt sprints. He's 7 for 30 over the past 5 years with a $1.86 ROI. And seems like this one's been working pretty well at Monmouth. Going back through her workouts, it looks like the one back at the end of May was in company with a horse named Crypto Mama, who is a decent allowance type, a minor stakes type for Kelly Breen. So maybe that's a good sign. This horse is a half sister to November Rain, who was a stakes winner on the dirt for the same connection. So, I mean, there are definitely some things to like about this horse. It's just, in a race like this, I won't be surprised if there's some steam on a firster if it ends up going off at a pretty short price.
Yeah, the one good thing, I mean, it's not the first leg of the pick five, but at least during the seventh race, we could check the double will pay or double probables as the race is going, maybe see if any of these horses are taking some money. Of the 3 first time starters, obviously, Irad Ortiz is going to draw some attention, but Kelly Breen probably has a little more success than Charlie Baker or Mark Hennig with these first time starters. Don't like the Mark Hennig drew the rail. So of the 3, Nate Jude is the one I would consider using.
Yeah, I'd use her. I do think the number 6, Island Rose, the Charlie Baker first-time starter, is pretty interesting. It's kind of funny to have 2 daughters of Gun Runner in this New York bred race, but she's one of them. Not a ton of damn side pedigree for Island Rose, but I do want to note she was entered in that June 16th race that a few of these come out of. I think Bonadou ran in that race. And she was scratched. She was a vet scratch that day, but she went right back to the work tab after that, so I'm not going to read too much into it. But I do recall when I saw the DRF Clocker report for that race that there was at least one positive write-up on one of her workouts. So I do feel like this one might have a little bit of ability. She's one that I would definitely want to use because nobody has to be that good for me to take a liking to them in this field. And, just one bigger price that I want to mention, Craig, and I'll say right now, we're recording this kind of early on Thursday. I haven't yet made my picks for Saturday, and this might be the last race that I actually commit to picks for because it's so difficult. But I do want to mention a horse that I'm at least considering at a big price, and that's the number 4, Montauk Mystique, who I think I have the biggest price on the morning line at 20-1. She's coming out of that June 16th race. It was run over a muddy track, and she just, to me, looked like a horse that really needed the experience. She kind of got out the back door early, was extremely wide on the turn, but watching the replay, she looks like a daughter of Laubound that has some nice size to her. I think the 7 furlongs is going to suit her, and she's getting a rider upgrade, putting blinkers on, just feels like a horse that maybe was being given a race first time out and could do a lot better here. And if you have a price idea in this race, it's the time to take a shot because you want to look for prices in races where the favorites just don't really look that formidable.
Yeah, and the one other thing I wanted to mention before we move on was that June 16th race. It's a race I wonder if it was a little better than what it looks. It was a race at a really fast pace. As I mentioned, there was a horse named Shaman Princess who kind of ran off early before packing it in, but a horse who finished back in 6th, Big Hazel, that day, who really didn't have any excuses, came back to win at this same level, actually beat Ichiban next time with a much improved speed figure in 87. So I just wonder if that race maybe is a little stronger than what it initially looks like on paper.
Let's move on to the 9th race, and this begins the stakes portion of this late pick 5 sequence. It is the grade 3 Kelso, this one going a mile on the inner turf course. Craig and I actually just did a stakes preview for this race that you can check out on Daily Racing Form's YouTube channel, where we go through every single runner in the field. But Craig, I think, having already discussed the race with you, we pretty much agree that there are 2 pretty formidable looking favorites in this race in the number 2 Annapolis and the number 8 Casa Creed. I mean, they're both former grade 1 winners that are dropping into this grade 3 event, kind of at different stages of their careers. Annapolis is kind of rebuilding, coming back off his 4-year-old, for his 4-year-old campaign off a layoff. I mean, he won his first start back in the opening verse, and I thought did it well enough. Might have to take a slight step forward here. And then you've got Casa Creed on the outside, who kind of, throughout his career, keeps going back and forth between the sprint distances and the 2 turn races. Doesn't win all the time, but he's been successful doing both, and both of these horses look like they're going to be tough to beat in this race.
They do. They're deserving favorites. Two Grade 1 winners in a Grade 3 race. That's something you probably only see at Saratoga, particularly when they're in good form, like both of these horses appear to be. So they'll definitely be on my tickets. But as usual at Saratoga, things aren't always that simple. I prefer Casa Creed of the two, just mostly a value play. I think he'll probably offer a little more. Annapolis has Irad Ortiz, it's Todd Pletcher. Casa Creed will maybe fly just a little bit under the radar, probably just like your morning line says. I really liked what I saw from him in the Jaipur. He lost a lot of ground that day, mostly due to his bad post position. Um, Even though he got ran down by Big Invasion late, that one's really good too. A top turf sprinter. Caravel is in career best form. Nobody seems to be able to beat her. He was only beaten a length, and as you've mentioned, he's done just fine at a mile. He won the 4-star Dave at Saratoga last year, or Grade 1. He's had other successes in mile races in the past where he's ran great. So with a slight odds disparity, I would make him my top pick. I don't want to totally I'm not dismissing Annapolis. I thought he ran fine. His speed figure was good on TimeformUS. That is one that got a big pace upgrade. It was only a 112 final time, upgraded all the way to a 125. But as I look through the chart, it seemed like the right call. There's been plenty of runbacks from that race. All the horses have basically run similar speed figures to what they were assigned that day. So I don't have any issue with it. Maybe you might be deceived by the margin. He only won by a head over Churchtown, who was a mid-price horse that day, came in on good form, but not really a name horse. But he had everything over Annapolis pace-wise, sitting right up off of that slow pace. So I expect him to run well, but there's a couple others I'm going to use as well. More as a seahorse, I would use the inside horse English B. He's one I'd be more interested in playing in verticals, particularly tries. As a horse who I just think, given his inside post position, Johnny Velasquez riding him, I assume he's going to get a good ground saving trip in a race that we didn't really talk about the pace projector, but it definitely looks like there's some real speed in here. We discussed that in detail on our race preview. And I think English B's going to run a big race. It's not like his speed figures are that far behind. He consistently runs right around the 120 mark. So if he somehow wins at a huge price, I want him to be on my ticket, and I'll definitely be using him in underneath slots. The other horse I'm going to use, I know, is one that you're even more interested than I am. So I will turn it back over to you for him.
Yeah, I know. I'm glad you brought up English B. I think you make some good points about him, and I don't really view him as necessarily a horse that I would want to use on the win end, but this is the kind of race where you could have a big price pick up second or third, and he's the kind of horse that you could key underneath some of the logical types that you like in a trifecta and really get a better payout, because he's really not that far off some of these from a speed figure standpoint. But as you were saying, I do like the number 7 Anaconda in here, and there are a number of reasons. I mean, you brought up the pace scenario, which I think is something that we should discuss a little more. I mean, there are 3 horses who feel like they have to go forwards in this race. 2 of them drawn just to the inside of Anaconda, Big Everest and Filo Diariana, 2 horses that really have done their best running when they can get to the front by themselves, and it just feels like that's unlikely to happen in this race with each of them in the field, along with the number 3 Midday Image, who has shown a lot of speed in his prior 2 turn efforts and is now coming out of some sprint races, so he's probably going to be pretty sharp. So it just feels like a race where the pace is going to be honest, and not that Anaconda needs a pace collapse. I mean, he's got some tactical speed himself, but he's a horse that tends to be maybe a step slow out of the gate. We saw that last time in the poker when he broke about a length behind the field, but after that, the pace moderated a little bit, and he got a bit rank in behind horses, rushing up on the inside. Took a little while for Tyler Gaffalione to settle him down. He did save ground after that, but once they got into the stretch, he just never really had the clearest path to run through. He tried to go through between horses initially, had to alter course back down to the inside of Filo Diariana along the rail, which often isn't the best place to be closing in the stretch, especially in a race where there's a horse rallying to victory down the center of the course. So I thought Anaconda ran pretty well, all things considered, in the poker. I also thought he might have run the best race when he faced off against Big Everest in the Dangerous Hour power 3 back. And I just think he's a horse that's moving ahead at the right time. Admittedly, beating both Annapolis and Casa Creed is going to be tough, but I think the trip is going to work out for him, and he's going to be a better price than those two. So he's the horse that I did put on top in this race. No argument with you, Craig, about Casa Creed. He's supposed to get the right kind of pace setup, and I tend to agree that he's just fine going a mile. And, Annapolis can certainly win this race. I'm not way against him, but he is a horse that does have a tendency to get a lot of good trips, and maybe that's just him. Maybe he's a horse that can make his own good trips, but, we saw what happened in the Breeders' Cup when he kind of got hung wide. So, I do want to be careful of not overrating horses who do capitalize on a lot of favorable circumstances, and Annapolis obviously is talented, but I think he does kind of fall into that category, so I worry that he could be a bit of an underlay in here.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. Like I said, I recommend people watch our video, which will probably be out around the same time as this if they want to see more discussion of the pace. But I do think there's some definite speed in here, and I think that's why neither one of us are big fans of Big Everest in this spot.
Let's move on to the 10th race, the last graded stakes that they'll run on Saturday at Saratoga. It is the Grade 3 Sanford for the 2-year-olds, going 6 furlongs on the dirt. And we've got 10 runners signed on, Craig, though I wonder if some of them are going to be unhappy to see one particular horse in the entries. We'll see if all of these 10 actually go to post. But I put out a poll on Twitter the other day asking who was a more likely winner at Saratoga on Saturday, in Italian in the Diana or Gold Sweep in the Sanford. And, people kind of scoffed at me, and I think the results were like 85% in Italian. And I don't know. I'm not sure it's so clear cut that this horse isn't a more likely winner, just because In Italian's actually facing some real competition. And as good as she is, I mean, she's going to have to beat some nice stablemates of hers. But, Gold Sweep, Craig, he showed talent that we don't often see from 2-year-olds at this time of year when he won that Tremont so impressively. And I'm just not sure that he's facing much of quality in this race.
I agree with you. I somehow missed that poll. I mentioned before, I think I just follow too many people. But it's fine. I like people. But Gold Sweep, I personally don't see how he loses this race if he shows up. I would have voted for him in your poll because who's the real competition in here? I guess if I had to pick one horse most likely to beat him, maybe it would be the 3-horse Dickens, just because he has a speed figure that's at least within hailing distance for a 2-year-old to improve. But Gold Sweep was just so good last time, and he came out of a maiden race, which has turned into a real key race. I know we've talked about it before, and when you look at the chart for his win in the Tremont Stakes, all the other horses basically ran their race. It's not like any other horses took a big jump up. Matter of fact, a couple of the horses that didn't run just fell off the map. But the 2, 3, 4 finishers all ran very similar speed figures that you would expect. And I personally think Gold Sweep is the real deal. And what's going to be a very tough sequence to narrow down to a reasonable play, I just couldn't come up with a reason to use anyone else.
Yeah, I'm not going to draw this out. I'm not trying to beat this horse either. I mean, he looked really good last time, and you mentioned it. His debut race was better than it looks because, I mean, not only did he show the ability to come from off the pace, which is something you always want to see, that versatility from 2-year-olds at this time of the year, but also that was a race with some really strong runbacks, multiple winners, horses who ran really fast races coming out of that race. So, I mean, it's not like his Tremont came out of nowhere and he smashed what honestly might have been a better field than this one. I mean, the runner-up Ship Cadet, I actually think has some talent, and Gold Sweep just easily defeated him. The other horses in this race, they'll be big prices if you can make cases for them. It's just tough to view anybody as being so likely to make up the speed figure deficit that Gold Sweep seems to have on this field. I mean, we can kind of go through just a couple of them for conversation's sake. I mean, though, number one, Call the Cavalry feels like a horse that could take some money. Irad Ortiz was live first time out for Ken McPeak, but coming out of kind of a slow race, did have minor trouble at the start, but then slipped up the rail after that, so I didn't feel like he really faced that much adversity. Maybe he steps forward. You mentioned Dickens. I guess my one concern with Dickens, Craig, is that It's tough. I mean, you'd be the first one to say it, that it's tough to make speed figures for those 4.5 furlong races with basically no form on the way in. And, you want to take those with a grain of salt. The runner-up did come back at his next start and really disappoint, regressing by, I think, nearly 40 TimeformUS speed figure points. So that's something that you do want to consider with these horses. And, the fact that there weren't those huge gaps behind Dickens makes me think maybe that field wasn't quite as tough as it looked, based on the speed figure. There are a couple others that I think showed some promise on debut. I mean, the number 7 Triple Tree, that's a race worth watching at Woodbine where he really mowed down that field impressively, but I don't know what he was beating. I mean, the runner-up did come back to win with a decent speed figure. And then you got the outside horse for Dwayne Lucas, Market Street, who showed a lot of speed on debut. The race came up surprisingly slow for one of those Ellis Park 2-year-old races. Most of them have been a lot liver than that one was. Maybe the sloppy track had something to do with it. And this horse was green that day, so there might be some upside. But these horses are going to need to have a lot of upside to beat Gold Sweep.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't know what to make of Market Street and that speed figure. There's always the possibility it was the first race of the day and maybe the track changed as they were working on it given the conditions but it would just be a guess. They were 2-year-olds, no form coming in, so we kind of had to go with it. With the variant we used for the other races, if he runs bigger, maybe it's one we revisit. But even if he did, a Gold Sweep just has such an edge. You mentioned how he comes from off the pace a little bit, and now he draws outside, so it's not like he's going to get stuck in traffic. So for me, like I said in the beginning, it's a stretch for anybody else, and I'll just be singling. And I know neither one of us are really big fans of singling. It's pretty rare that we ever mention one we're going to do that with. So I think it just goes to show how strong he is in this group.
Yeah, I'm still not yet committing to going totally solo with Gold Sweep. I might have a couple backups in there, just given the fact that it feels like a horse that's going to be nearly a universal single in this sequence. But he definitely is formidable and not one that I'm investing very much at all in trying to beat. Let's close out this sequence with race 11. It is a maiden special weight event for the 3 and up horses, going 5.5 furlongs on the turf. Another maiden race in this sequence, but at least this race has a little more form than the New York bred race that we just discussed, Craig. And I think we do have a fairly legitimate favorite in this race in the number 2 Beer Run, who will draw the rail here with there being an entry in this race. Goes out for Wesley Ward, ran into a good horse on debut in Charging, who really nobody was any match for at Keeneland, and then took a step forward last time at Belmont, showing improved speed, just getting run down at the end by a Chad Brown Firster, who actually looks like he has some talent. This horse is fine. I don't know if I think he's, so formidable that I want to key on him in this race, but he's definitely a horse that I'm not that against.
I thought when I opened the PPs, and of course I go from the top down most of the time, especially when I don't have the morning line. Sometimes I'll start with the favorite and go that in that direction. But I wanted to be against this horse when I looked at his PPs, but the more I went through, I tried to be clever. I tried to find other horses with maybe hidden form. All I kept finding were negative things about all the other horses. So I'm with you. I'm not really against them. Not like I'm going to single them in here. I do think there are some other horses that are worth using, but the 98 speed figure he ran last time is pretty strong in a field like this. He does cut back in distance a little bit. I guess the one concern would be the inside draw. He's going to have to get out of the gate, get some good position, and I don't think he necessarily has to have the lead like he was in last time. And maybe that was even a little bit of a negative as he was hounded by another horse that's in this field the whole way before giving away to a different horse. But I do think he's a strong contender and one that I would use for sure.
Yeah, I do want to mention while we're talking about Beer Run, the horse that finished right behind him last time, Flat Top Box, who will probably be a better price in this race. He was a horse that I actually liked in that Belmont race last time, and I thought he'd move forward on the turf. He really did. Just not as good as Beer Run that day. He strikes me as one that the cutback to 5.5 furlongs should really suit him, because when you watch him run, he's the son of Munnings, who's really stocky, just kind of, built like a pure sprinter, almost like a quarter horse. So I think turning back slightly will benefit him. And he did kind of shut down at the end of that race. So I think the 6 furlongs is maybe just asking a little bit too much of his stamina. He's drawn inside. Scott Jose Ortiz sticking around, so he's one at a better price that I think could run better here as he continues to gain some fitness, and I won't be surprised when he turns the tables on Beer Run at what could be a slightly better price. But the fact that these two horses, Craig, look like, the two horses to beat on paper, I think it just speaks to the fact that for a Saratoga maiden special weight race open company, this just didn't come up the strongest field overall. A lot of unknowns, a lot of horses that are either, cutting back or first-time starters. So there's definitely some guesswork when you get beyond these two.
Yeah, I'll mention some of the negative stats with horses that I really wanted to kind of like. And I didn't really find any first time starters that jumped out at me. I'll be curious to hear what you have to say about those. But of the horses that have run, I'll start with the 5 horse Nickel Nickel. He is one of the first time starters, but when I looked up Danny Gargan, he just has not very good numbers, particularly at Saratoga. 2 for 29 with a just minuscule ROI of almost, I think it was about 50 cents per $2 bet. So that's not really one that's going to be for me. The 12 force, I won't even pretend to know how to pronounce that, so I'm just going to call it the 12 force, is one that actually comes in for Bill Mott with a big speed figure last time, bigger than anyone's run. He did it as a 2-year-old. Now, it was earned in a route. He's cutting back. He was a horse I thought I might like in here, and then it's kind of what I was saying. I looked up Bill Mott, and when he has a turf to route maiden, on the turf, route the sprint, 0 for 12, and he only had one horse hit the board, and there were a lot of short prices in that sample, so I just wasn't that sold on him. Paxational, the 6 horse, was another who comes in with on a turn back with a speed figure that looks competitive because he was up pressing a very fast pace that day, but when I look up the trainer, Eddie Barker, the stats were not good as well. He was 1 for 20. That win was in a very cheap maiden claiming race at Tampa with a horse who was favored. So obviously the ROI is not bad. So for me, I just had trouble finding any alternatives that I like. So I'll be interested to hear who you like. Alternatives to the top 2 that we've already mentioned.
Yeah, I'm going to mention one horse that you already brought up that I maybe have a different take on, or maybe not a different take, but, I'm going to overlook the negative with the number 12 by Long, that's how I'm going to say it. Craig, I mean, he, like you said, he showed real talent last year, running those competitive speed figures as a 2-year-old. Now, those were 2-turn races, but he faced some decent horses. I'm Very Busy on debut, or I should say his turf debut, and Reckoning Force finishing between those two. And then that last race at Aqueduct, that was a race where the pace might not look like it was super fast, but it really fell apart at the end. That was a race that just completely inverted, where the horses that were at the back of the pack ended up finishing first and second, and those that were up front just totally fell apart. So I want to give him credit for hanging on as long as he did in that race. And watching those races back, he feels like a horse that just visually to me that is going to like this turn back in distance. I don't mind the American Pharoah sprinting on the turf, and this horse just has a really powerful stride to him with some nice extension, but you could tell watching his races that he doesn't sustain it for the whole duration of those 2-turn races. So I think the 5.5 might suit him a little better. I saw those bad Bill Mott stats. I'm aware of them. It's kind of funny the way stats evolve over time. I remember when I first started doing this, 4 or 5 years ago, writing, this analysis, for DRF, Bill Mott had good stats, turf, route to sprint. He was one of the few that actually had success with that move, and it's difficult to pull off, but he kind of dried up having those winners over the past 4 or 5 years. I don't know if that's by design or if it's just, randomness that it went from being a positive stat for him to a negative stat. I'm not going to put too much stock in it. I just think this horse is going to be well suited to these circumstances, and I don't believe he's going to be the favorite in this race or among the favorites, so especially with that outside post, perhaps the price will be fair enough. But when I get beyond him and the 2 we already mentioned, Craig, that look solid, it's hard to build strong cases for a lot of the others. The firsters, they're just, not the most convincing. It's a little weird that a couple of them are debuting on the turf, like Nickel, who they paid so much for. To me, it doesn't look like a huge turf pedigree. The horse that I think is a little interesting as a firster actually is the number 10 Metallurgic, who feels like the one that's maybe least likely to take any money, since there's not too much sexy about him. Irad Ortiz is on a different one, and Danny Gargan paid a lot of money for the other horse. But Metallurgic is a homebred coming into this race for Mike Maker, but just the fact that he's shipping this horse from Kentucky for this race and shows some decent workouts, and I like the Cairo Princess on the turf. Wonder if this is one that might outrun its odds. So I would use that horse, but this is a race generally where I don't want to go that deep. I like By Long. I like Flat Top Box, not against Beer Run, and I would use Metallurgic, but beyond those four, I'd probably try to keep it down to that quartet of runners that I'm using to round things out.
Yeah, I'm with you. It looks like one of those races that's wide open, and maybe people might be tempted to spread, but that's why when I did the work, I just couldn't come to it. And I could see where I could make a ticket because I didn't go crazy deep on any of these where I could use the two you mentioned. By long, I hear what you're saying. 12 is not a huge sample size. Maybe I'd be more concerned if he's not the favorite, but it is Bill Mott. I'm not going to hold trainer stats against the guy too much because he certainly knows what he's doing. I forget if you mentioned he's a first time gelding, so it can't hurt. I know that's not the most reliable stat that we ever see, but I would imagine in this case it's true that this will be his first race as a gelding given the long layoff. So just a race I'm not too crazy about, but don't want to go too wide in here because I prefer to spread a little bit in other legs, particularly that second one.
Craig, I actually have to call an audible because I forgot to mention a horse. And forgive me, like I said, I haven't finalized my picks yet, and I kind of forgot to mention a horse that I actually like in this race. The number 3 Cigarette Boat is one that I don't want to go without discussing because he's getting on turf for the first time. Again, another Mike Maker horse in this race. And just looking at his pedigree, the weird thing is that they've never tried him on the turf before because he has all turf pedigree. I mean, he's by Cantharos. The dam was just clearly best on the turf. Dam sire is Broken Vow, who I personally think is one of the more underrated turf sires in the game. They did try him on Synth one time. That was his best race. So maybe that is indicative of some turf inclination there, but they kind of weirdly went to dirt after that. This is a horse that is supposed to be best on turf based on pedigree. And watching his races, I don't see anything in his physicality that says to me that he's not supposed to handle it. He's drawn really well. It feels like one that doesn't have as sexy of a look as some others in here because he's already had a bunch of chances. So just didn't want to go without mentioning Cigarette Boat because he's one that I'm definitely using and he's going to be a decent price.
I'm glad you brought him up because I made a note about the synthetic race and forgot to mention it while I was talking about all the others. No problems with him at all. He's going to be a price, so I can see using him for sure. I did want to mention we didn't talk about it. There are some also eligibles in here that maybe they won't draw in, but if they do, I think they're worth talking about. The 13 horse Alexis Zorba is a Chad Brown horse who showed some talent as a 2-year old, would certainly take some money and probably be considered a contender in here. And then half of the entry, Schnitger, the 1A, is a Wesley Ward first time starter who would probably also take some money if he were to draw in.
Yeah, I that's a good point. Alexis Zorba definitely would take some money. Personally, I didn't like his turf sprint last year when he was running for Joseph O'Brien. It's a little curious to me that Chad Brown is bringing him back in a turf sprint since Chad is not the most inclined to run his horses sprinting on the turf, especially 5.5 furlongs. So maybe that's a positive. Just at what could be a short-ish price, he's one that would have a lot to prove, at least to me. So if he draws in, he wouldn't be one that I'd be looking to upgrade too much. Well, that wraps up our handicapping of this sequence. Let's do a brief recap, Craig, and just talk about, how we might structure a ticket. I get the sense that you and I would structure things pretty similarly because it feels like, we'd be narrowing things down in the same spots as probably a lot of people. It just feels like one of those sequences where that's the way to do it, at least based on the opinions that we have.
Yeah, in the seventh leg, there were some horses, Bola Cherries, who you mentioned. I worry that you might get overbet, but it's a leg which I want to get through. It's the opening leg. I think she could win. She's not going to be favored, so I want to use her. And I also want to use Lady Milagro as an A, who might just be a horse who just speed blitzes this field. She's so fast. Turning back to 5.5. There is a little other speed in here, but maybe she's just faster than them. She has the speed figure, so I want to use those two, and also Playlist, who I was really impressed with her race at Ellis Park. The speed figure might be a little bit low, but she just did it so easily. She looked like one who just really got things together, and I expect a bigger number than we saw from her last time. They would be the horses that I keyed on the most. The next race, I would spread quite a bit in here. I don't want to cover all of the horses that we talked about, but a couple of the price horses I do want to mention were Shotgun Patsy, the Bill Mott second time starter who had those really good stats in Formulator, and the 5 horse Bonadou, who chased a really fast pace, the one run back from that race, uh, from a similar position as Bonadou as well. Came back to run with a much improved speed figure, so I wonder if that race is better than it looks. The horse who came out of that race actually beat the morning line favorite Ichiban that day, so I'm just a little lukewarm on the favorites. But again, it's a race I would certainly be spreading. In the Kelso, I would use 4. I would focus on Casa Creed and Annapolis. I think they're obviously the two most likely. But I'd also use your horse Anaconda, who I think's had some tough trips and is improving even as an older horse, 6-year-old now. On turf, these horses are still getting better, in my opinion, through their 6-year-old season. So I could see a jump up from him. And as a C type, I'd use English B, but I'm really more interested in that horse as a vertical player and maybe exactas, but more so trifectas. He's going to be a big price. The Sanford, for me, it's all about Gold Sweep. If anybody else is to beat him, I probably won't have him because I'd just be guessing. On paper, it's hard for me to make a case for anybody else, so I'm going to take the easy one. He obviously isn't going to offer any value, but I'm not trying to spend money beating him. And then in the last race, we mentioned several horses. I don't want to dismiss 2 horses that are probably going to take the most money. Beer Run and Flat Top Box. I think both of those horses are legitimate and could easily win this race. You mentioned Cigarette Boat at the last minute. I had kind of forgotten about him as well, but I did like his race on synthetic. Bred for Turf, I would be using him, and you kind of talked me in to buy long. I can see it. Bill Mott getting him back on the turf. He's a horse. It wasn't a great stat for him, but he's got plenty of attributes, including the good 2-year-old speed figure that I could find him on my tickets.
Yeah, we've got plenty of common ground in this sequence. I think we just differ in some of those really complicated races. To start things off, I think Playlist is the horse to beat in the 7th race. I kind of do prefer her a little bit to Breeze Easy. But like you said, I like Bowl of Cherries. She just feels like a horse that, as long as Irad Ortiz doesn't pull too much money her way, I think she's going to be a decent enough price for me to go for in here. Not that I'm way against Lady Milagro. I just am not quite as confident in her 5.5 furlong sprinting ability as you, but she's definitely one who I'm a little bit afraid of in there. In the 8th race, it's just so tough. I do want to use the first time starters, Island Rose, as well as Nay Jude. It just seems like a good race for a firster, but I think a lot of people are going to view it that way, so I don't think you're really getting much of an edge there. Among those with experience, they're tough to separate. I do think Ichiban ran okay last time, and I don't want to leave her out, but it does feel like a tougher spot. The horse that I am going to use somewhere, probably pretty prominently, is the number 4, Montauk Mystique, who I made that case for. It just feels like a horse who was prepping first time out, probably going to be more professional in this race. She's one that I could use. Look, I could even use the number 3, Crystal Air, who I didn't mention in my handicapping, but people who follow my NYRA analysis know this is a horse that I've had a bit of a thing for, and she's always big prices, has outrun her odds a number of times. Eventually, a horse like this is going to win at a big price, and maybe this is the right kind of race to do it. So I could use her as well. It is a race where I do want to spread, and I could potentially leave some of the shorter prices off my tickets and maybe spread with some bigger prices if it works out that would be the affordable option. in the Kelso. I picked Anaconda on top. I'd primarily use him and Casa Creed as my main two, with Annapolis as a backup. Probably not going much deeper than those three in that race, but obviously hoping to get Anaconda home. In the Sanford, I mean, Gold Sweep is going to be as close to a single as I really get. I might use a tiny bit of horses like Triple Tree and Market Street, just because I think they both at least showed something on debut and have some upside, but they would be the most distant backups, just using my strongest opinions in the surrounding legs. Most of my ticket will for sure go through Gold Sweep. And then to close things out, I initially said there are 4 runners I want to use. There are 5 runners I want to use, but the ones that figure to offer the best value are Cigarette Boat and By Long. I think By Long is a more likely winner, having already showed that good turf form. But I just think Cigarette Boat is interesting getting on the surface. Beer Run and Flat Top Box are fine coming out of that maiden race. I'd use them both. And Metallurgic is one that I could use as a backup, an interesting first-time starter. Just a bit of a guess, but just feels like one that could have some ability at a bigger price.
Well, as I said in the beginning, I do like the sequence. It's tough. I imagine we're going to be doing several Saratoga pick fives. There will be some other tracks mixed in along the way, but Saratoga is kind of the mecca, and they're going to have a lot of good cards. So good practice to start out. Looking forward to racing today, which is already started as we're recording, I believe. But just really excited for the Saratoga meet Del Mar next week and just summer racing in general. It's that time of year a horse player should really love.
For sure. It's always a real test of your handicapping and wagering skills. It's a tough one, but these races are always a lot of fun to handicap and to discuss with your friends, and that's what we love to do on this podcast. Everybody, thanks for listening to the TimeformUS forecast this week. You can always check these out on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in, and Craig and I will be back early next week to recap some of this action on the TimeformUS Pacecast.